Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It has to be one of those three. So, wherever you are in the world, whatever you're doing, whatever you're having happen to you today, I hope this will be a few minutes, 45 minutes or whatever it is, of getting some value, some thinking, some entertainment, dare I say it, from listening to this episode of Leadership Bites. I have Ryne Sherman with me today. Now, Ryne is the Chief Science Officer at Hogan Assessment Systems. And for those of you that have never come across Hogan before, they are a truly global entity. They operate in 56 countries, they work with 47 languages, and some half of the Fortune 500. So this is an organization that has real reach and real credibility. Now, I don't actually even use Hogan Assessment. So there's in no way here a sales pitch, and I wasn't approached by them. I just reached out because as I've looked into the market for where I'm going to almost hang my hat, I'm level AB certified. I used Myers-Briggs. I use SDI in the past. I've used 16PF. I understand the market, but things move on, and I haven't really been using assessments for some time, and it's something I wanted to relook at. What particularly appeals to me is this idea of science-based. Lots of assessments out there offer the depth and the quality of their thinking, but I do find some of them somewhat sketchy, if I was going to use that language, in what it is that they're actually doing and what it's actually based on. So I wanted to reach out, and who else would you want to talk to than somebody who's the science officer for an organization? So here we go. We have an episode, for me, is part of the person, because I always like to know about the person, and then some conversation around profiles inherently, but also then, of course, for me, some understanding of particularly why I particularly might want to look more deeply at an assessment such as Hogan. So I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone. To record. Great. So, Ryne, great to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites. Welcome.
Well, thanks a lot, Guy. Happy to be here.
And, I've done a little introduction as I do when I do these episodes. And so I've kind of given people a sense of who you are. But it'd be great just to hear from you who you are, the role that you inhabit, and the organization that you work for.
Sure. So I'm the Chief Science Officer at Hogan Assessment Systems. We are a premier provider of personality assessments for personnel selection and leadership development. That's the main area that we work in. My background is in personality psychology. I have a PhD in personality psychology. I worked as a professor for 6 or 7 years in a couple of different academic institutions, teaching personality psychology, teaching what's sort of the equivalent of business psychology before I stepped into this role at Hogan and started running our data science division. And, the basic problem that we work on is, there's a whole host of problems that organizations have. But the central problem is, who should we hire and who should we promote? Who should we develop? Who's high potential? Who should be in these leadership roles? And we help organizations make those decisions using scientifically based personality assessments.
So thank you for that. And I'm particularly interested in this space for a couple of reasons. So it's obvious to people that know me that I deal in leadership development. So by definition, looking into the assessment space is quite key. And I don't hang my hat on a assessment that I use for a couple of reasons. Some of it I think is just that not all organizations use the same one. So from that perspective, it can become quite expensive to try and be certified in everything. So right. there is an element to that. I'd do them all if they were of a price. And then the other side, and we'll get into it a little bit more, is which one for what. So if I'm looking at Hogan it would be great just to get a sense of why would I have you on my radar for what output, and so I can have that thinking around contextualizing Hogan.
Yeah, so when it comes to thinking about psychometric assessments, one of the big one of the big things that we talk about at Hogan a lot, because to us it's really central to what we do, and this isn't true for everybody and for different reasons. But one of our central aims and goals is to have the most valid assessments in the business. Now, what does valid mean? What does validity mean? It basically means that when you get a score on our assessment and we say it predicts this outcome, that's more true of our assessments than other ones. At least that's our goal, right? So we have sort of hung our hat on the validity rack. We say the validity is the most important thing. There's lots of reasons that people might take personality assessments, but for us, it's about predicting an outcome that you care about. And so that's what we really spend a lot of time doing. That's why, for example, on my team, I've got about a dozen staff members, PhDs, master's degrees in psychology, that work for me full time, who are constantly updating our research, constantly doing new research, constantly pushing the boundaries of what can we actually predict from a validity standpoint, and making sure that what we say about our assessments, when you get a report back from us, that it's actually true. It actually predicts those outcomes we care about.
So I probably know just enough to be dangerous. So I might be in that category. So I obviously know a lot more than the layman, and obviously half as much as you, right? So let's hope, right? so let's just check it. Let's just sort of check something out. I guess that validity piece is absolutely key, because there are some people, there's a distribution curve, I think, when it comes to things like psychometrics in people's relationship to them. Some people, I'm a believer. Others are, well, I'm sure the good ones work, through to other, people, well, they're only as good as what you tell them, right? So there's always that. And that's the stuff of life, possibly. What I notice is with psychometrics, that there is a certain conversation amongst certain people out there that, for example, the big five traits, that those are the only valid ones out there. So Jordan Peterson, well, for those, if you don't know him, anybody look him up, but he's a well-known person, and he's kind of in that path of, if it's not one of the big five, then it's not really that valid. And I just wonder, when people look at that, why they would maybe, what they need to consider from your perspective.
Yeah, so, well, I think that the academic community is pretty clear, and that's where Jordan Peterson comes from. That's where I come from as well. That the academic community is pretty wedded to things like the big five, or sometimes this big six, sometimes known as the hexaco model, that there are these sort of core traits that really come from descriptions of other people. So all of this started with dictionaries. We go through the dictionary and we say, guy is blank. And then every word that could be put in that
just
blank.
Stop there. There's a joke there somewhere.
Yeah, that's right. We write down all those words, and then we just see in real people, how are real people described using those terms. And what happens is you can see that some of those terms are used in overlapping ways. Some of those terms are more similar to each other. And that's where the big five comes from. And that's the academic tradition, says that, this is the way that people really describe people in the real world. But there are other theories, other models of personality. I think probably the most popular, most widely known one is the Myers-Briggs. But there's certainly others that don't come from that tradition. They don't come from that tradition of what we call the lexical tradition, which is about describing other people. So while it's in some sense, you could say, well, the big five, that's really the most valid set. And of course, our own assessments at Hogan are big five based, where that's the tradition that we come from. There are other approaches to assessment that I think are different, but they're really for different purposes, right? So, the purpose of our assessments is predicting workplace outcomes. If your goal of assessment, and I think a lot of people would think of somebody like Hogan, wow, Hogan wouldn't like the Myers-Briggs at all. I'm totally agnostic about it. Myers-Briggs could be great depending on your purpose, right? So if your goal is to get people to understand that people are different from each other, If your goal is to get people to get to know each other a little bit better in some kind of a team setting, something like the Myers-Briggs can work great for that. But if your goal is to predict performance, this is something they don't talk about, right? Because this is something that their assessments aren't designed to do, and they don't use them in this way. But if your goal is to predict performance, then you need to look somewhere else.
So this is where I'm either going to make a fool of myself or come across as actually he knows enough just to be able to stay in the conversation with you. If we talk about trait and type, where does yours sit? And maybe for those that don't know, what's the difference?
Yeah, so types are basically saying that that people are sort of categorically different, right? So think about birds, right? There's different types of birds. There's eagles and there's robins, and these are categorically different. They're all birds, but they're categorically different from each other.
Yeah.
And it would be the same kind of logic with types. Whereas traits say, well, there's all birds, but then they have differences in sort of wingspan. They have differences in their song, those kinds of things. And it's measuring them on those dimensions rather than saying these are categorically different creatures or different types. They're saying that these are that they all have the same set of core features, in this case traits, that differentiate, and they can all be differentiated on all of those traits. From an empirical standpoint, it kind of, again, this is one of those things where it depends on what you're trying to do. If your goal is to understand how people are different from each other, if your goal is to make really broad stroke generalizations, types can work really well. If your goal is to predict, very specifically how someone will behave on the job, it seems like traits do quite a bit better. So that sort of trait approach. So both have their uses. It really just depends on their goal. Again, because we're in the prediction business, we usually use the trait approach.
So for type, again, for people coming into something like this, that some people will be very experienced, but that's more that developmental, it's more the conversational, it's probably, well, it might be fixed to a point, but if it was fixed, then we can't develop it, but it's very good for teams. It's very good for the individual to have a reflection on the different human beings that might surround them.
Well, and the real big advantage of types is it's really easy to talk about, right? If I say an eagle, you know what I'm talking about, right? If I describe a person as a type, right? If I say, well, they're the pragmatic type, you get a sense of all kinds of things. You don't just know about one particular characteristic, or in the Myers-Briggs nomenclature, if I say they're actually, I'm not very good at it. I don't.
Well, an ENTP or an ESTJ.
Yeah, something like that. If I say something like that, then it gives you a really quick sense of what that person's like, and that's the beauty of types, right? I can give other examples, right? If I say I had a meeting with the boss or I had a doctor's appointment, you immediately have an idea of what happened, right? It gives you a really broad. Now, there's all kinds of specifics that happen in there, but it gives you a really solid foundation of what that person's probably like in a quick, in just a few words. So there's real advantages to types from that point of view.
But not for recruitment.
Well, right. If I'm going to predict how somebody performs, the problems with types is nobody actually fits a type perfectly, right? So you're kind of like, everybody's sort of, they're kind of close to this prototype, right? But everybody has little differences, little ways that they don't quite fit, and those are actually turn out to be really important when it comes to predicting performance. So if I'm trying to predict, who's going to be safe in the workplace, who's not going to cause an accident, I don't just want to know type. I want to know pretty specifically, how do you score on a whole host of traits that are related to safety behavior.
So that's where, when it comes to Hogan, it's as a predictor. It's used in the assessment space.
Yeah, for sure. So we use it. We actually use it in both ways. We use it to predict workplace performance a lot, but we also do quite a bit of developmental work in it, leadership development. Actually, on occasions, we've been accused of both. Well, I've been told, oh, Hogan's only for selection, but I've also been told, like days later, Hogan's only for development. We actually do both, but it's for different purposes. So we do a lot of leadership development as well.
So I'm not in the recruitment space. I'm in the one-to-one coaching space. I'm into the senior team effectiveness space. I'm in the management / leadership development arena. So if I was going to pull your systems into my work, one-to-one, teams, that's the kind of space that I can look to use the Hogan
Yeah. So,
assessment.
and yeah, and exactly. And one of the things that I would say is a little different from us versus a type-based measure from a development standpoint is, again, that type gives you that one quick shot of information, really simply. Our assessments. So if you take our core assessments, we have 3 core assessments. If you were to take those, there's over 100 subscales, but let's just stick with main scales. There's 28 main scales. And over, like I said, over 100 subscales. And, you start doing the math on how many possible quote unquote types of people you can get with this. And it's, there are more types of people than there are molecules or atoms in the universe. It's really quite astounding how deep it can get. So what I would say is, to summarize that, with types, you get a really simple approach. With traits, you get lots of complexity. And so it depends on what you want to do. If you're doing coaching and development and you really like that complexity, you really want to get down deep with an individual. A lot of the executive level coaches that we work with do this. That's where something like us is really useful. If you're wanting, much more quick one shot kind of thing, then something that's type based is usually a little easier to work with.
Okay. So in terms of how you stay, I don't know if I was going to use the right word there, but be it ahead of the game or on point, what is it that keeps you at the tip of the spear when it comes to the rigor of what it is that you do?
Yeah, this is a really important question. Of course, it's something that's really important to us as well. A few things. One is that, as I mentioned earlier, we have a large research team. We're constantly doing research. We do research with clients all the time. We do hundreds of research studies a year. Our archive, our criterion related validity archive. So what this means is we measured your personality, and then months or years later, we measured your performance. We have over 400 studies in that archive. And as I just described that, you can see how long each of those studies must take, right? So that's part of it, is that we're constantly doing more studies. We're constantly adding to this archive, to our database, that sort of just continually validates the assessments that we're working on. So that's part of it. But the other part is we also work with academics around the world. So people have access to our data. People can write us and say, hey, look, I know you've got data on truck drivers and their safe driving behavior and their personality. I'd like to do a project or some research on that. And we say, sure, here's our data, go ahead, publish your paper. And I think that's really one of the things that sets us apart, is we're sort of like, look, we're comfortable being independently reviewed, right? We're comfortable having other people come in who aren't us, but who are experts, and have a look for themselves.
So there's something there about that reach and that rigor, and that being open to, not oversight, but people's line of sight, maybe, is what I'm hearing there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think that's really important to us. I mean, again, it's rooted in our foundation, right? So the 2 people who founded the company were both academics, Robert Hogan and Joyce Hogan. They had long successful academic careers. I think, Robert Hogan was in what was 58 when he started, when the company really got going. I think he was in his early 50s when they started, but the company really got going when he finally retired as a professor. So, he had a whole career as a professor and a whole career in that academic tradition of science and, being able to replicate what you say, having other people scrutinize what you say and say, and have to almost reluctantly conclude that you're right.
So the assessments that you do, just as an overview, because people can look on the website, of course, quite quickly if they want to, but we're talking about individual leadership assessment, we're talking about team assessment, we're talking about 360, or yes or no. Give me a sense of the buffet.
Yeah, so we have assessments for pretty much all of those purposes. We have assessments for individuals, if you want sort of individual personalized development. Again, we have lots of assessments for selection. We have assessments for teams, several different options actually around teams. We just recently built a tool for actually assessing team effectiveness, which is a little different. It's not a personality assessment. It's a more of a team kind of 360 thing.
Okay.
That's pretty neat. We have assessments for, there was one more you mentioned. Oh yeah, certainly for leadership, leadership potential, leadership development, those kinds of things as well. So, and I think, Guy, and maybe we'll get to this later, one of the topics that's really important to us, and I know it's really important to you, is leadership, because we know just how important that is for an organization's success, and that means that's really important for the people who belong to that organization. And so we spend a lot of time, helping companies not only identify those leaders, but develop the leaders that they already have in place for exactly that reason.
So I wonder if there is a shift in society. There's something about trust. There's something about the surveys that I think it's the Edelman Trust Survey that talks about trust in the world, that for the last few years have said trust's been at its lowest across all factors. And there's something about, I remember that if somebody in a place of positional power at the age of 50, if a doctor told me you've got something wrong with you, I'd accept it. Now I Google it, presuming that he or she might be wrong. There's something about the relationship with positional power, and we're seeing that in people that are coming through on social media, where social media is giving us a line of sight on people in positional power, that for all the 90% of the good that's done, we see the 10% that's bad, that gives us a sense that, hey, these so-and-sos aren't to be trusted. So I wonder if you, or within an assessment like this, or within that kind of talent capability, I wonder if there's a factor of change that maybe is accelerated over the last few years, or actually, no, that wouldn't be relevant, Guy, because people as human beings are inherently of a trait perspective. And I just wonder if that comes in as, well, it's interesting, but actually doesn't affect what we do.
Well, that's actually a really good question. And we actually have data on this in part because one of our assessments measures something we call skeptical, which is essentially to a lesser degree, a little bit of paranoia, right? So it's a little bit of, but it's really about mistrust. I don't trust other people. And through a series of sophisticated analysis, we actually have a way of determining is skeptical, is people being skeptical going up over time. And over about the last 15 years, we actually do see an increase. That's the only scale we see this increase on, is that we see this increase across all people, right? So it's all people of all ages. And I think you're exactly right. This corresponds directly with these other kind of national surveys. People don't trust their political institutions. They don't trust their religious leaders. They don't trust doctors. They don't trust experts. So this is a really a common thing now. And I really don't know the right way to sort of correct the problem. I think it's sort of a problem we've made for ourselves. By being unreliable, right? By, finding out about, experts who lied, or experts who were paid off, or, politicians who aren't, who are dishonest, that kind of thing has really eroded public trust in lots of institutions.
I think one of the things it's showing me is that your competence in role is not enough, because roles used to come maybe with an inherent respect. You've reached a level of positional power / hierarchy. It comes preloaded with obedience, a level of submission, etc. But maybe with the increase in skepticism and that kind of thing, that leverage or that balance won't work for you in the same way. I mean, people will do it out of fear or the I have to. So yeah, maybe it's that's a data point that says, well, actually, in your development, you're going to have to get the elegance and the craft to be vulnerable, to show your true self, because you're combating a level of increased skepticism that is preloaded against you, regardless of who you are and how great you may or may not be. So maybe that's a factor.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that's certainly the case. Is that expertise has sort of lost some of its cachet or prestige or
Hmm.
um, the value that we would historically put behind it. And um, yeah, I like I said, I don't really know a good way to fix it except
No.
to try to to try to be more honest, I guess. And I think that's what it comes down to is it's about trust and honesty. And
Well,
the
your
public will.
material isn't supposed to have the answer, is it? It's supposed to. It's probably thank goodness, but what it's there to do is to be accurate, to create conversations, and to bring the challenge of culture, maybe that says actually if this is true across our leadership community or the people that interact with it, then that's yeah, and the data's solid, then that's the conversation that we need to be having, I guess.
Yeah, that's kind of it, right? We this isn't the space we play in terms of trying to answer those questions. But me as as a scientist, I these are questions that I think are important for all of society to be thinking about. Like,
Hmm.
what can we do to to recapture the public's trust?
Hmm. So it brings us on to for me, I think people's behavior around psychometrics, and we were talking about this just a little bit before we came
Hmm.
online, which is that in my experience, and this is probably a gross oversimplification, but there's kind of two types of people that when they do psychometrics, and one of them is the person that sees the psychometric as a tool in their toolbox to be utilized just like a plumber, which tool for the job. And then there are some people that go full cult member when they get certified. God, bless them. And they start to see the world through a lens, like
Hmm.
you're a red or you're an, it's because you're an E, isn't it? And so, and actually in some respects, the beauty of the tool is kind of lost in the behavior of the individual because people start to feel pigeonholed and that kind of thing. So I just wonder when Hogan is I don't know if there's a mitigation against that from your end. Is it no, the tool's valid and people just have to behave with it as they will, or no, we're kind of alert to the fact that the tool might be great, but actually it's the manner of people utilizing that we have to be alert to. And I just wonder if that factors into anything that you consider and work on.
Well, it's certainly a concern that comes up frequently, right? So people ask us all the time, well, wait a minute, are you just pigeonholing us or are you just, if we use your assessment to hire people who are successful, aren't we just going to get all the same people here? Isn't this going to hurt diversity is one of the big questions that we hear a
Ah,
lot
okay.
today. And actually, that's actually again one reason that you might prefer trait-based assessment versus the type-based assessment is because with the type-based assessment, you really are limited in terms of the number of things that you're going to get out. Because ours are essentially limitless. There's really no risk of pigeonholing anybody, saying, "Well, this is what makes you different from other people," in a whole variety of ways. And so there's no real risk there. On the sort of the diversity front, though, it's that there still is no risk here, but it's harder for people, I think, at least intuitively to understand. They think, well, we're just going to hire all the same people. But the reality is, for any given job, there's usually a handful of traits that really matter, that are most critical. And so we say, okay, well, this is a customer service role. These are the people, these are the kinds of traits you're going to be looking for in a customer service representative. But all of the other traits that we measure don't matter. And that's the beauty of an assessment like ours or like some or another trait-based assessment, is that the ones that don't matter are totally free to vary. So you end up with the people that you want on the critical characteristics. Well, this is really critical to perform in this role, so you get that, but you end up with total diversity on the other characteristics. And one of the real beauties of personality assessments is that men and women get the same scores. Black people, white people get the same scores. Asians and non-Asians get the same scores. Old people, young people get the same scores. Technically, old people get slightly tend to actually fit jobs a little bit better, but that has to do with emotional maturity and things like that. But the point is that there's really no difference between these groups in terms of their scores. And so you actually end up hiring a more diverse workforce than you might than you might otherwise.
It's
I
kind of,
think I frayed from your question a little bit, Guy.
well, it doesn't matter. We're amongst friends. So, but what I'm hearing there is it's almost, it's cleaner. It's more transparent. It's more clinically kind of non-biased.
Well, that's one of the things that attracted me to personality, and actually was one of the foundations of the company. The company was founded right after the Civil Rights Act, as a part of, right. So as the Civil Rights Act, and then there was what's known as the EEOC, which was this a committee to create equal employment opportunities for everybody in the United States. And Bob and Joyce Hogan said, these assessments don't have biases the way, for example, cognitive ability assessments are well known to show group differences. And they said, these assessments don't, and they predict performance just as well. I think we've got a real business opportunity here. That's essentially how the company started. Was this is an opportunity to promote hiring a more diverse workforce in a way that's fair, but still valid, right? That still actually gets highly qualified candidates who otherwise would not have been, who wouldn't have been given a second thought because they were from a lower social class or they were a minority group member.
So within what you guys are working on now, is there anything, and I don't want to say, I'm laughing to myself when I say this, but when I say new in the pipeline, are you in that kind of is there new product creation? You talked about team effectiveness, but is it actually, do you know what? It's a pretty solid base of what we do, but so what comes new into the arena from your world?
Well, it's a really good question. And I think there's, in any kind of business, there's sort of pressure to show what are the new products, what are the new products. And the reality is, from an assessment standpoint, we've already covered the landscape. There's really, when you're talking about a personality assessment, so we have what we call a bright side measure. We have a dark side measure, which is wildly popular because we were the first people to develop one. And we have what we call an inside measure, which is about your motives and your values. So we've got these three measures, and it really covers the entire known space of what is personality. So from an assessment point of view, not really, but one of the biggest thing that we're working on is like I think a lot of companies these days is improving the technology, and that includes the technology of the assessment, the technology behind the scoring of our assessments, and the technology on the output side, like what the actual administrator or the user gets. And so we actually just launched a new thing called the Candidate Assessment Suite. That would have been the end of September, which is much more high tech than the previous systems we were using. It's a way more user friendly. My favorite part of it, because I'm the science guy, is that the algorithms behind our assessments are improved. So we got to do some really cool stuff. So our assessments have always had really high validities comparatively from a personality standpoint. And we took all those old algorithms and said, can we make them better? Can we use new techniques like machine learning, AI kind of stuff, and make them better? And we did, like quite a bit better, which is really cool. So we had really good stuff before, and now we've made it even better. And that's all in this new system. So we've really, from a new product standpoint, wouldn't say that the assessments are new. What we're asking about isn't new, but the way we're delivering it is newer, more modern, more high tech.
So this is a bit like Coca-Cola. Don't mess with the formula and try and bring out new Coke.
They tried that once. Yeah. That's right.
So people, it is what it is. So that maybe the delivery mechanism might be different, but basically don't mess with it. Now, if an organization wanted bespoke work with you, so that, we have a very particular role, or we know the role might not be inherently different from anybody else's, but we want it to be very real to our environment or our future need. Can people work with you on a almost role specific basis?
Yeah. So I mentioned we got a dozen people on my research team. About half of them work on what we call client focused or custom client kind of research things. So we have lots of off the shelf things. So if you came to me and said, I need to hire salespeople, we've got something you can buy right now today. It's pre-validated. We know it works. Go ahead and go. But if you come to me and say, we've got this really unique role, we've got, captains on a commercial ships, sea like barges and things like that. And we want to know, who really, this is a real example, but I mean, we have lots of examples like that come to us. And what we do there is we have a process called the validity generalization process. And there's a whole host of ways you can go about it. And I won't go into all the technical details about it, but essentially what we can do is build a custom solution for any client. We can do criterion studies. We can actually say, well, okay, what jobs do we have in our database that are similar to that? And we can just say, well, that probably also works. We do job evaluations, which is a sort of a core IO psychology function. So we say, well, you tell us what are the most important characteristics of the job. And we have all those characteristics mapped to our assessments. So if you say, we need somebody who, instills trust. Well, we have a competency in our competency library called integrity that, guess what? That's the same thing as instills trust. And we line those two things up and, we say, okay, we can measure integrity with our assessments. We can help you get the people who fit that role. So custom is something we do a whole heck of a lot. And that includes all the way down to custom output, custom reporting. So some clients, to be fair, these are usually pretty big clients who have a big spend, come to us and say, look, we want it to look like it's all us. We don't want it to look like Hogan's involved in this at all. Okay, cool with us. We're happy to provide the science that you're looking for, and it can be on your website. It looks like your assessment. People get scores and an output that only says your name on it. It doesn't even say us at all. It's all you.
It's like
so
we build. It's a white label
exactly.
Version of it. Yeah. Okay. And does that then lead to being able to help people with maybe the questions that they might need to ask or the inputs that somebody might need for development? So that that periphery need around the assessment itself.
Yeah, it's a space we do get ourselves into. We try not to do that a whole lot, to be honest. We try not to play consultant. That is, we have consultants on our team who are consultants on our assessments, but we try not to play leadership consultant. We try not to play organizational consultant. We get those questions from clients from time to time, like what really is essential for a leader here, and we try our best to give that advice, but we also try not to play in that space. We try to let experts like yourself and other people who do that every day, all day, make those kind of calls. And we just try to help them. If they say this is what we are looking for, we try to help them get that out of our tools.
Okay. So in terms of commercially, I can imagine that lots of organizations use you. Are you used are you used in the military? Are you used, what other places or spaces that might it be of interest to know that actually, oh no, we use there?
So about 75% of the Fortune 500 uses us or has used us. So part of the thing is, you might be used for a little while and then the project comes offline for a while, but about 75% of the Fortune 500 at any time. We've worked with some pretty high profile sports organizations, particularly high profile sports organizations in the US. We have worked with a whole bunch of military things, police, more recently, since a bunch of events in the US, now some more police have gained some interest in working with us. A lot of military stuff. I can say US Navy, we've worked with military contractors. We've worked with some organizations that I can't say who we work with.
Okay.
Pretty much everybody.
So basically presidential candidates should probably go through a Hogan assessment, right?
Well, I would love that. Actually, I wrote a blog post on Psychology Today in 2015. Yeah, it was in 2015. Actually, it was my most popular blog post I've ever written about Donald Trump and his personality. So he had the first poll had come out with him leading. So this was a Republican primary. He was not even the candidate yet, but the poll had just come out with him leading a Republican primary. And he was really talking about how I'm going to win now. And at the time, everyone was like, well, he's not going to win. This is ridiculous. And I thought, well, I'll write up a profile, because I had some reporters asking me, could you tell us about his personality? I said, okay, I'll just write up a thing and just refer you to that. And he ended up winning the Republican primary, then he won the presidential election, and so it's my most popular blog post of all time. So, but I would love it if presidential candidates would take assessments. I doubt they will actually subject themselves to it.
It should be a criteria that even if we don't publish it, could we do the work on it? So we can actually understand what a good one would look like, perhaps. But
and we have done some work where we said, what do people want, right? So what do you look for in a president? And we've mapped that to our assessments as well. What do people think is an important the important qualities of a politician? We've done that same thing for lawyer, things like that.
So listen, time is a cruel mistress, as a colleague of mine sometimes says. But so I'll put links in the description to the website, so people can connect that way. And you're on LinkedIn as well, aren't you, Ryne?
Yep, sure. You can find me on LinkedIn.
So I'll put a link in. I'll put a link in there as well. But just on a personal note, I think that gives me that's been intriguing for me, just to kind of get a sense of where it is that you guys come from, what it is that you do, and I'll definitely. Because I'm trying to decide where to hang my hat. So this is definitely pushed me down the path of I may have to have a proper conversation with you, So thank you for that. But just on a personal note, thank you so much for coming on and stay on for a few moments when I press stop, just to make sure nothing goes horribly wrong.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Thrilled to be on here, Guy, and really appreciate it.
That's it, so I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share so others get to hear about us, and subscribe so you keep up to date on new episodes. Also visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with me and find out more about executive coaching, team effectiveness and changing culture. Oh, and of course you can buy my book Living Brave Leadership on Amazon. So on that note, see you soon.